Okay, thank you, Helen. I hope you can hear me. I just finished 4 hours of online teaching and I have to reckon that I feel like my voice is completely gone. Probably a beer will help at the moment. So we've been working with GSQ on magma fertility. Initially, we were focused on Mary Kathleen domain, but for this talk, I would like to extend a little bit to the larger Mount Isa. I think the concept itself is better not to look in isolation to a single domain, but to look at the larger scale of the entire layer. So I have to thank here some other people that have been working on this project, such as Helen McCoy-West, who joined us in February on this project, and she put together a very comprehensive database of geochemistry of different igneous rocks from Mount Isa. Paul Durst, Joshua Spence, and Tron Le, who've been doing quite a bit of the field work. And we've been working very closely with a GSQ team, they've been doing work as well in the Mary Kathleen domain. So just in the event that I'm going to lose my voice, I want to start with conclusions. So igneous suites in Mount Isa are similar in composition, except probably Sibella batholith, which appears to be slightly different, and that is more obvious in some of the trace element geochemistry. In general, they are moderately to strongly evolved. Wonga and Kalkadun suites are least oxidized. Williams suite is most oxidized. All igneous suites show low strontium, yttrium, and lanthanum ytterbium ratios. They have, in general, seems to have continental arc geochemical affinities. Hafnium isotopes indicate an increased crustal contribution with time. And as a general conclusion, I would say, at least from my point of view, generally the magmatic fertility potential of all of this intrusion is low. Probably there can be a little bit of discussion about the Williams suite, but there's still a bit of work to be done. So in terms of structure of my presentation, I'm going to have an introduction where we're going to talk very briefly about the magma fertility concept. Then we're going to highlight where the issue of magma fertility comes in Mount Isa. We're going to talk quickly about magma and mineralization in Mount Isa. We're going to review very quickly some tectonic models for Mount Isa, and just because tectonics plays a role in the magma fertility process. And then we're going to look at results from the magma fertility project, and I'm not going to read again the conclusions, so let's move forward. So the magma fertility concept can be summarized in this way, that the mineral deposits form from hydrothermal fluids exhaled from magmas. These hydrothermal fluids and the deposit can deposit the metals within the intrusive itself or in the country rocks. So from that point of view, the concept is mainly applied to igneous hosted mineral deposits, such as porphyry system, copper, gold, moly, tin, and epithermal gold deposits, tin tungsten and associated polymetallic deposits, and also orthomagmatic deposits, which can include nickel, copper, chromium, but obviously we are not talking about this type of deposits in Mount Isa, but also to country rock hosted deposits, such as skarn deposits, IOCG, orogenic deposits, orogenic gold deposits, and so on. Almost probably most of the hydrothermal deposits have at some point been linked to some kind of magmatic activity. The bottom right corner of this slide, you can see a conceptual model of a porphyry system where you have a depth, you have a pluton from where suppose the melt is extracted, and then here lower levels in the crust, higher level in the crust, you have a porphyry stock where you have porphyry mineralization, and associated with this in the country rocks, you can have proximal copper skarn, you can have sediment-hosted distal sediments, and in the upper part, you end up with epithermal deposits. So it's important to keep in mind the magma fertility concept do not apply strictly to igneous rock hosted deposits, but can be applied to deposits which are not necessarily hosted by igneous rocks, such as the IOCG deposits in Mount Isa or maybe other parts around the world. So what are the main characteristics of fertile magma? So I summarize here maybe some of the most important ones. So fertile magma are characterized by high water content. They have high sulfur content. They are oxidized. And in general, they have an adacitic signature, especially we talk about porphyry copper gold deposits, such as high strontium-yttrium ratio, high lanthanum-ytterbium ratios. But what they also have in common from this point of view is that this have been related, or it's implied that they are related to slab melting and or metasomatized or fertilized mantle or subcontinental lithospheric mantle. So the image to the right shows a simulation, Monte Carlo simulation, where different characteristics and elements that contribute to the formation of porphyry copper deposits, particularly AM and Andean type of copper deposits, and how that relates to the strontium-yttrium ratio in magma. And what they found that at the strontium-yttrium ratio between 50 and 150, magmas having this ratio, they are the most likely to form large porphyry deposits. The diagrams below show the distribution of copper porphyry deposits as function of their strontium-yttrium ratio. So the one on the left shows for strontium-yttrium ratio between 0 and 50, and most deposits in this are very small. The two larger deposits, Atlas and Cananea, according to the authors, they may plot there just because there is insufficient or very limited strontium-yttrium data. However, if we look at the strontium-yttrium ratios between 50 and 150, you see that you have a much larger proportion of the deposits, and you start having some really large deposits occurring within this interval. And at values above 150, there are very few deposits. They are usually very small. So this strontium-yttrium ratio in magmas associated with porphyry copper deposits, and in general, this ratio has been interpreted in different terms, but from this point of view, one interpretation is that it highlights high water content, which kind of suppresses plagioclase fractionation. So you end up with high strontium-yttrium, and that could be an indicator of high water content as well. Other interpretation, of course, include that indicate high pressure melting in the garnet stability field, such as melting of a slab or horn or amphibole or titanite fractionation and so on. Don't remember also some of this interpretation of high strontium-yttrium value have been applied also for rocks which do not necessarily involve a subduction setting, and they were derived by lower in the lower crust melting. So what is the favorable tectonic setting for magma fertility? If you look, take the example of porphyry deposits, probably 90% or more of the porphyry deposits occur in a subduction setting. And there have been some porphyry deposits described from post-collisional subductions settings. Some of them are interpreted as thermal rebound or due to delamination of the subcontinental lithospheric mantle. And usually with post-collisional extensional setting, we do not have examples of porphyry copper deposits, and most of these deposits are epithermal type deposits. So in terms of Mount Isa, we are looking for a tectonic setting that it's prone to forming copper gold deposits, assuming that they form in similar tectonic settings to time and they are equivalent. We are looking to a subduction setting. Ideally, we are looking to a continental arc, but an island arc should not be excluded, although probably it's unlikely in Mount Isa. So what about magma and mineralization Mount Isa? So this table here summarizes the main characteristics of copper gold deposits in the Eastern Fault Belt. So we have in this column here, we have the characteristic and then how they relate to different geological features such as metamorphism, deformation, intrusive events, and the scale where this occurs. So obviously we have economic copper, gold, mineralization, and other metals that can come associated with this. And this usually in Mount Isa is interpreted to be most of the deposits to have occurred during retrograde stage, although some deposits such as Osborne interpreted during peak metamorphism. In terms of deformation, they are related to Eisen deformation, D2 or D3 or later. As intrusive events, we have with peak metamorphism, we don't have any intrusive events, but we have pegmatites, which have been at 5090. But we have associated plutons, 15, 50, 40, 90 plutons, which correspond to the Williams suite, and that's probably the link, the closest link between mineralization and magma. So the scale of deposits obviously is local. Then we have sodic and orthosodic calcic alteration that it's in general interpreted to occur during peak metamorphism, during D2 in terms of deformation associated with 1590 Ma pegmatites, and the scale of this alteration is regional. As we have iron oxides, biotite, feldspar, and apatite alteration, which is interpreted to occur during the retrograde stage, usually at upper green schist facies. In terms of deformation, depends how you interpret D3 or later, and is associated temporally and with the Williams suite plutons, and obviously the scale of the alteration, it's a local. Then we have strong structural control, usually brittle ductile shears, and these are interpreted to occur at the retrograde stage at upper green schist facies. They are D3 or later during the isonorogeny, and the timing is synchronous with the emplacement of the Williams suites. And the scale of this structure varies from local to regional, most of the deposits being actually hosted on local structures. Then we have the temporal association with A or I-type plutons. And locally with these plutons, we have high grade contact metamorphism and regional retrograde stage. This during D3 or later, and obviously the timing is 50 to 59, and the scale of these plutons, it's regional. So there is this thinking, or has been proposed in the literature, that IOCG or copper gold mineralization in Mount Isa is related to the intrusion of the Williams suite, Narak-Williams suite, and therefore there it's a potential for investing into magma fertility concepts. So going further into this, so what I have here, it's a map in the background. It's shown the geology of, simplified geology of Mount Isa, and actually just shows the distribution of different intrusive events. So you see, if we go from left to right, we have the Big Toby, the Sibella suite, then we have the Kalkadoon event, then we have the Wonga Burstal event, and here we have the Williams event. So what it's interesting, or an interest observation, probably everyone has seen this, it's not something that you cannot see. All of these intrusions have a general north-south trend, they occur in belts, and they don't seem to overlap with each other, except there seems to be a little bit of overlap between the Kalkadoon and the Wonga and the Burstal suites. On top, in the image to the left, on top is plotted the distribution of copper occurrences which have a reported production. And you can take whatever you like from here. If you look in this area, you can say there is indeed an association, but I think whatever dot you throw on this map is going to be somewhere close to an intrusive rock. If you look that way, but you can say that there is, and not necessarily hosted in intrusions, but they are closely related to intrusions. If we look at deposits or occurrences that have a copper endowment of more than 10,000 tons copper, the map becomes much more clear, and a few different intrusion are, different deposits are highlighted. So we can see the giant Mount Isa, MS Henry here, and Osborne, and again, you can claim there is a relation with intrusions or not. It's difficult to say how closely related they are to different intrusion times, but the general distribution of deposits do not imply a necessarily special correlation with Williams-Naraku systems. So in terms of tectonic models for Mount Isa, the earliest tectonic model I came across dates from 1961 from Carter, and I'm not going to go in detail of this, but it's just at the time when the plate tectonic was starting to be developed, and we don't want to be too critical of this tectonic model. What pretty much implies it's intracontinental rifting and deformation and orogenesis, and you have this concept of basins that cover the entire area of the Mount Isa layer, and probably from this era we start having the idea of cover sequences, then was followed into super basin and basins and so on. But I think we can all agree that this type of tectonic strutting maybe is not conducive for magma fertility, at least from what we know from present day. So more recent tectonic models, such as the one on the right and the one on the left, they imply some kind of subduction and evolution in a tectonic setting much more similar to present day tectonics. This particular model here on the right hand side indicates post-Barramundi orogeny, indicates extensive periods of extension in Mount Isa, so extension after extension after extension, which is terminated by inversion during the Isan orogeny and so on. But the model on the left, I'm not going into detail, it's just been published recently, implies that the eastern coast, the Proterozoic eastern coast of Australia had a similar tectonic setting with the Andes, so implies a supra-subduction style of tectonic setting, and that obviously will be very conducive for porphyry or for copper gold mineralization. So let's go to results from the magma fertility concept. So to talk about magma fertility concept in Mount Isa, first we need to define the problem, or the concept, the hypothesis. So the first problem, I said that let's put this concept forward, that magmatic processes that generate copper gold deposits in modern geological systems are similar to time and space. And probably the most obvious things to come from there is that they are similar to operate in similar tectonic settings and have similar fertility indicators. And the second one is, if Williams age or type granites are responsible for copper gold mineralization on Mount Isa, then this type of granites should show similar characteristic probably to the first concept and should be distinct from the other igneous suites in the region. So our approach for this project was to do a lot of field mapping. So we started a lot of field mapping, look at geology, structures, plutons, trying to determine the relationship between the plutons and the country rocks and the formation and so on, so we can understand very well how they sit into the system. Targeted geochronology to understand the timing of pluton emplacement, deformation, and other geological phenomena. Sampling for geochemistry and isotope analysis, and of course data compilation, which Helen has been putting together. So in this data compilation, we had the new data generated by JCU, new data generated by the GSQ team, GSQ historical data, OSCEM data, and data from thesis collections that were not previously included in any of these data sets. So after screening for alterations as objectively as we could and eliminating all analysis for pegmatites, albitites, eplites, and so on, we ended up for the first igneous rocks with 720 what we consider good chemical analysis, 140 from Williams, 250 for Sibella, 84 for Burstall, 90 for Wonga, 133 for the Kalkaduni event. And for Big Tobes and Mungo, just 23 analyses, which we did not include into the discussion. And you can see on the image on the right, the distribution of this analysis. And they do quite a good coverage, so we can talk at the scale of the Mount Isa about magma fertility based on this analysis. So I'm going to go quickly through some of the results. So what you can see here is some geochemical classification diagrams. I'm not going to spend too much. They do plot mostly where you expect them to plot into the, most of them into the granite field, with some of them going towards granodiorite and diorite. They usually are very similar and plot in a similar, in similar areas. There are slight differences. In general, they are metaluminous to peraluminous. And if you look on this diagram, rubidium, barium, strontium, on this diagram, I just contour the extent, the distribution of different igneous suites, because if you plot them on top of each other, it's quite difficult to see actually how they relate to each other. So you can see based on this diagram that some of them are strongly differentiated, and that's particularly true from some members of the Sibella and Burstall and Williams, and not necessarily for the Kalkadun vent. Some of them plot into what these authors claim in this field, that they are anomalous granites, and they interpret them as granites that express metasomatism. It's difficult for us to test for that based just on the chemical analysis. We try to screen it as best for alteration anyway. In terms of major elements variation diagrams, they do what most igneous rocks do. They have very similar trends, some not differences. If you look at potassium and sodium, you may notice that, for example, sodium Williams suite seems to be higher in sodium, whereas Sibella seems to be a bit lower in sodium. And both Williams and Sibella seems to have higher potassium overall than the others, but otherwise they are very similar to each other. In terms of trace element geochemistry, again, they are very similar. They plot more or less on top of each other, except Sibella suite, which is particularly obvious in terms of yttrium, lanthanum, cerium, niobium, and if you look at zinc, that it's different. Otherwise, they seem to be very similar. Most of the igneous intrusions in Mount Isa have been interpreted as Sibella and Williams as A-type granite. So just plotted quickly all of this on a discrimination diagram for A-type granite. And they do plot, especially the Sibella suite plots into the field of A-type granites, but most of them actually overlap with other type of granites. And yes, they indicate some A-type granite affinity, but you can see that they are very similar. In terms of tectonic setting, tectonic discrimination diagram, we will use this diagram from Muller 1992. You see that invariably all the analyses plot on this diagram into this field. So this field separates the within plate granites from continental arc and post-collisional arc from initial oceanic arc and late oceanic arc. So these granites from Mount Isa also, it's quite clearly they do not plot within plate field. They also do not overlap with the oceanic island arcs. So we can put that aside, assuming that these diagrams are representative. And the diagram on the right differentiates the continental arc for post-collisional arc granites, and all the granites from Mount Isa definitely plot into the field of continental arc. And from the magma fertility point of view, that would be a good thing.
Are you able to finish up soon, Johan?
Sorry?
Are you able to finish up soon? Because we're a bit over time now.
Yeah, just a few slides. I'll go very quickly to them. So just very quickly, hafnium data from Mount Isa. So with red, it's igneous rocks. With this color, it's detrital and data from the literature. And you see that there seems to be, in general, a trend from more primitive value, if you look at the maximum value, towards more evolved in this time. And I want to compare this trend from the Lachlan Fault Belt on eastern border of Australia, just to see the difference between what is interpreted as a fault belt evolving in a back arc, more like a setting where you alternate between retreating slab and advancing slab, and Mount Isa over a similar time period. You can guess that the evolution, Havnum evolution, is very different for these two terrains. I'm not going to stay longer there. Very quickly, in terms of fertility indicators, here is the oxygen, the oxidation state of the granites in Mount Isa plot, and which shows that they are in generally highly oxidized to moderately oxidized, and the Wonga is the least oxidized, in Kalkaduna the highest oxidized Williams. In terms of strontium yttrium, we have very low values, and look at the field for fertile porphyry copper, they do not overlap. The same is true for lanthanum ytterbium. I have just two slides, Helen. So this one highlights on the left is the distribution of the analysis, and on the right, using this analysis, I'm doing an inverse distance whitening, shows how evolved are these different granites. So the color scheme is here at the top, from strongly evolved to moderately to unevolved. And you see the distribution of most of the granites are actually moderately unevolved. From that point of view, are probably can be fertile. And also you have plotted the size of different porphyry deposits. And one more slide showing fertility indicators, same inverse distance weighting of the strontium yttrium ratio across the inlier. And you see that for most of the inlier, the strontium yttrium ratio is below 20, and just locally in Kalkadun, in the Kalkadun suite, you have some values above 20. And in terms of the oxidation state of magma, and I think this is the most interesting part, you can see that the distribution of oxidized granites, and the Williams suite obviously is the most oxidized. And yeah, I'm going to leave it here if I run over time. Thank you.